Hello, everybody, and good evening. This is Cheree here with Simply Funded, and I'm joined by my good friend Phoenix Sayat. Hello.
Hi.
Tonight's conversation is a little bit different. Usually, I come on and talk to you about loans and funding and things like that. But tonight's conversation is about protecting your assets. And Phoenix is an attorney. She helps with regards to title. She also does, things with regards to trust and estate planning and things like that. So I thought it would be great to have someone come and just talk a little bit about asset protection as you are building your real estate portfolios. So, Phoenix, welcome again. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Cheree. My name's Phoenix Ayat. I was formerly a military spouse and I grew up in Georgia. This is probably my third time living in the Northern Virginia area, but I've lived a lot of places because of moving around with the military. And I've been an attorney for 17 years. I started my own firm after working in other various capacities for the first time in 2013. And then I transitioned out of that to go in-house at a title company as managing attorney. And so now I've relaunched my solo practice. It's Future Counsel LLC. My client base has led to the services that I provide. So as we've grown and as my network has grown and we've all, accumulated more wealth or we have goals for retirement, that's what I'm more interested in right now, the transactional side of the law. So my portfolio right now is asset maximization and protection, business guidance, so entity formation, determining, just fractional general counsel compliance, contracts, and then of course estate planning, because we want to make sure that we're protecting all of those assets, the legacy that we're all working hard for and have been working really hard for the last however many years.
Yeah, so, when you said asset maximization, you're speaking my language. I don't know how everybody else feels about that, but definitely, you know, um, when you talk about like protecting your assets and the topic of tonight is actually, I want to make sure I'm saying this right. We decided why real estate investors should have a trust. Um, could you talk to us a little bit about like thinking about us as real estate investors, just like overall, why we would even care about this topic? Why is it important to us?
Absolutely. So I think that determining how you're going to protect your nest egg and during your lifetime, and then what's going to happen to it after you pass away is something that we all at some point have to think about. And a lot of people leave that planning until too late. But if you're involved in investment activity, if you're involved in something other than just your daily wage and your W-2 activity, then you are really missing out. And I say this as someone who's owned and run multiple businesses before, and have my own investments. You're really missing out if you are not minimizing your tax liability, seeing and educating yourself on how you can have tax deferred assets, tax exempt assets, and then avoid just having the IRS take a really large piece of your assets. And the other reason that it matters is that if you're able to do that, if you're able to plan wisely and strategically, then you can look beyond the goal of just making money, and you can actually decide what's important to me and what do I really want to provide for? Am I wanting to be charitable? Am I wanting to make sure that my family is taken care of? Am I wanting to make sure that I give back, to the community through employing or something like that? Or maybe there's another cause. And assets and allow us to do all of that. So you want to plan carefully for it. I guess would be my best answer.
So, you mentioned the IRS, scary three-letter word, or three-letter phrase. Are you able to help people through trust when they're alive, to minimize the taxes, or is this just like a wealth transfer, generational wealth, thing that we're thinking about?
Such a good question. And I'm a lawyer, so I have a really long answer. So let me try to
Okay.
just organize my thoughts on this. One of the things that I would say to anyone who's coming to discuss their portfolio with me is I would say, how are you engaging in this and fencing off your assets? Okay, that's what we want to do. We want to fence things off and protect them. And it depends whether we're going to, look for some tax deferred growth, some tax exempt status, or whether we're thinking about down the road. Now, there's two things that you have to think about. Number one is, what are we trying to accomplish during your lifetime or while we're involved in managing the assets? And the assets can be securities, they can be actual rental, like income producing properties, can be a variety of things. And then what do you want to happen after you pass? And sometimes there's two different things you need to engage in. We're talking about your business assets and your personal assets are two different things to consider. So you want to fence off your personal assets, but you also want to fence off your business assets. Sometimes that can be accomplished by doing an LLC or some other entity status, and forming an entity and making sure that it's very well run and very well planned. And so that may give you everything that you need, depending on what kind of activity you're engaged in during your lifetime. But you could also, and we'll talk more about this, set up a complex trust that converts, and still establishes the goal, or sorry, still realizes the goals of avoiding probate, avoiding inheritance tax, avoiding capital gains tax for the ones that you leave behind.
Yeah, because, there was a time we always thought the estate tax was like for super, super wealthy people, but now those numbers are starting to come down. And with the appreciation of real estate the way that it is, and some of us are, getting to multiple homes that we could leave to family members, some of us are hitting those numbers with regards to the estate tax. So it is important for us to think about that. Um, I'm also glad that you mentioned the LLC versus the trust because and look, Phoenix is a lawyer, she's not your lawyer. So everything we're gonna ask here is going to be based on that. But most people would think, hey, I'm covered because I have an LLC. And what you're suggesting is sounds a little bit more comprehensive than just, hey, I have an LLC in order to do a flip or in order to have the short-term rental, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Um, you know, I have several clients, and my favorite thing to do is business planning with people, and making sure that it's protected after that. But business planning is where the growth comes from and where our income production comes from and maximization. A single member LLC is probably the easiest, most basic level of protection that I would recommend that you have. But in this, there's no one size fits all. Okay. So we need to ask the questions when someone's coming to me. How many people are involved? Is it always a single investor? Or are you sometimes investing with other people? Are you doing joint ventures, or are you just doing like registered joint ventures or partnerships? Or are we doing just contractual joint ventures? Who drafted the documents that you're using to look at that? Why does that matter? Because of creditors and judgments. So the best thing that a lawyer can do for you, or a well-drafted contract, is it leads to an easy divorce. Nobody plans on having your deal go up in flames, but when it does, you need to have easy divorce procedures so that you are protected. Um, an LLC, a single member, just regular basic LLC, if you have a good bookkeeper and you keep good books, can really limit those assets from being able to be reached by creditors and lawsuits and judgments from former partners or whomever is going to come. Let's say you were underinsured for something on a property. There was not, proper liability, or there wasn't title insurance. Yes, Tim, I do have experience with setting up limited partnerships, limited liability partnerships, and limited liability partnerships. So, and those are all three different things. I saw that question come in. The other questions I would ask is like, what are we doing with the investment? What's the point? Are you just financing? Are you actually holding and operating, income producing properties? Are you doing new construction? Are you doing flips? How long are you planning on holding the assets? If we're just looking at lifetime activity and you're going to retire from this one day and then you're going to liquidate it all, that's a different conversation of how we're going to set it up than if you're trying to keep it for the long time and then you want to pass down the actual title to real estate to somebody in the future. So there's a couple different levels. Like I said, there's not one size fits all for the LLC, but if you are engaged in this not as like a one-time thing, but you're going to continue doing it over time, sit down and talk with someone about it, look at the options.
Right. But the biggest thing is this is a business and we are officially business people and entrepreneurs. Honestly, when you even buy your first house. So this house that we live in, my mom and I, is in a trust. And we have it there. I mean, we did ours in case if I pass away, she doesn't have to go through probate and all of that, and then vice versa. For people who just have their own home right now, they may not have all of the other real estate portfolio yet. Would you suggest that for them as well? Would you suggest that protection?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me give you guys an example that's a little more interesting than me just droning on. So, this came to mind because you just mentioned you and your mother. Okay.
Hmm.
One of the biggest mistakes that people can make is to put a loved one on the same deed of a piece of property instead of putting it into trust. Why? Because if you co-own property, and you guys all, I'm assuming, know about capital gains and basis, right? The cost basis. But as a quick review, let's say that you bought a piece of property for $100,000, and then when you go to sell it, it's $500,000. And so 500 minus 100, that's 400,000 of dollars, okay, in capital gains that can be taxed unless they're exempt. Now, if two people co-own a piece of property, then when one of them passes away and leaves this life, the remaining person becomes the owner of that property. They also inherit the basis.
Hmm.
So they have $100,000 basis, okay? And then when they go to liquidate the asset, they're going to be taxed on it, capital gains. If you put it into a trust, right, and they're not on the deed, they get the step up in basis. So the date of death, if it's worth 500,000, now their basis becomes 500,000. And when they want to liquidate it, if they do, or transfer it to someone else, then, let's say they're selling it now for $600,000, they only have $100,000 in capital gains, or zero if they decide to sell it right then. So I think that people are often making the mistake of saying, I just want to make it easy for my family member. I don't want them to get kicked out of the house. I want them to know that they own it. But you're really putting them on the hook for losing a lot of wealth that you invested in and that you're trying to accumulate. It's just going to go right out the door.
Right, right. What about people who have multiple children or, multiple siblings? Do you suggest that all of those, let's say, children be in the trust as well? I mean, like if they were all going to inherit equal parts of the property, or
A
does it
trust
depend?
can do, no, a trust is structured. So basically, it's a contract, right?
Hmm.
Assets are held in the trust by the trust for the benefit of the beneficiaries. Your beneficiaries are most of the time your heirs. Sometimes they can be other people or other entities. And so you're going to put one person in charge of marshaling, administering, and distributing the assets. And then you're going to say exactly what you want to happen with them. These are going to be held in perpetuity. And every time there's a sale or every time there's income, we're going to make distributions, or we're going to liquidate everything and we're going to distribute it out to my beneficiaries. But to answer your question of whether you would put more than one child in a trust as a beneficiary, that just depends on what your goals are. I will tell you this, a trustee can't do anything with assets in a trust that they're not instructed to do. So you either give the trustee the power to do anything that they want, or you say, here's what I want you to do. And if there's a limitation, they can only do that under the law. The great thing is that they don't have to go to probate and make appointments with the judge and then file an inventory and an accounting and have to go through all this stuff and have to have a lawyer assist them with that, and then also have to go and be charged probate fees. So it makes it a lot easier on whoever is left behind, because as long as they have the certification of trust, they are the title holder, and they can do whatever they want. If we set up an LLC or a C Corp or a real estate investment trust, which is a corporate entity, during your lifetime for the management of the assets, then what we do is we either have a pour over will or we make an assignment of your ownership of shares or interest in the LLC or other type of entity. And that automatically goes into the trust upon your death. So now it's been protected from creditors the entire time that you're managing the asset. And then when you pass from this life, it's going to go automatically into the trust, and the trust is the one who's going to manage the asset after that if they don't liquidate it.
Can you have as many trustees as you want, or really is it better logistically for you just to have one person?
Um, you can have as many as you want. Here's the most common scenarios. The most common scenarios is to have one trustee with successor trustees designated, but
Mm-hmm.
each one of the trustees, if they want to decline to serve, they have the power either to pass it on to someone next in line, or they can appoint somebody that they choose that they think would do a good job. You could have a situation with co-trustees, and then there's a lot of different iterations of that. So you could say, I want John and Sally to be co-trustees, and either they have to agree or either one of them may act independently of the other at any time. Just depends on who's available on which day. And then the third common scenario is that you would have a corporate trustee as well. You could make them the only trustee, or you could make them a successor trustee, or you could make them co-trustees, meaning that somebody with a good business mind who's financially prudent is going to sign off or at least advise on all of the decisions of the trustee. And you would do that when you have a less sophisticated individual stepping into the role, or if you have concerns about that person's spendthrift issues or
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
Yeah, I mean, so we've seen a lot of stuff in the movies. I know for one person I know in real life, she was complaining. She was 50 something years old. Her father left her money, and he was a judge. And whatever he wrote in that trust, she said that I still have to live by his rules, even from the grave, because of whatever he wrote in the trust. So now she was doing quite well for herself as well. So I said, your father seemed to have known best. Um, but what are some of the most interesting stories you have with regards to how people have set up their trusts, especially as it relates to real estate? You have a couple of interesting stories that you've seen out there.
Oh, of course. Yeah. And just to be clear, just to go back, like there are, if we're, you can do a complex trust,
Hmm.
which allows you to kind of uh, transfer ownership of the assets during your lifetime, because taxation follows ownership, right? So if you don't have control over your assets or own the assets anymore, and they're put into a complex trust or an irrevocable trust or one of these other trusts that we can do during your lifetime, then they're not going to be taxed the same way and they're not going to be accounted for the same way. But I think what you're talking about more is the revocable trust for your personal assets, and we're moving your real estate holdings into it upon your death, right? Or afterwards. And so one of the biggest things that comes up in title land is, okay, mom or dad or uncle has passed away. And then I had one case, I can't remember if you were involved in this transaction with me, sure. I don't think so, but there were 8 heirs and they all inherited title. And the trust said, okay, so and so is going to be the trustee, and then the beneficiaries are all my descendants. So problematically, they had to approve the actions of the trustee, and trying to like these people were spread out all over the country, just all over the country, right? Some of them were unreachable. They were in rural areas. Some of them were very sophisticated, high net worth individuals, and they weren't even in this country. Some of them didn't care to be bothered with it. They had their own things going on. So that transaction, or those transactions, I think took months and months and months for us to do. And I thought that if there had been better trust planning, and if the trustee had been empowered more specifically with her powers, she would have been able to accomplish everyone's goals much more quickly, because we could never do the powers of attorney. The trust didn't allow anyone to what's it called, reassign their fiduciary duty. So they all actually had to participate, in the same settlement conference at the same time, which was a nightmare because they were not in the same state.
That does sound like a nightmare. And I think that was one of the things that I just kind of want to bring up is, not making, like, really kind of thinking through scenarios and not making your trust, whether it's business trust or personal trust, so rigid in some instances, but kind of really thinking logistically how people are going to be able to, um, you know, abide by your wishes and still maintain whatever asset you have, whether it's in life or death. And
Yeah.
speaking of life or death, if people are incapacitated, um, do can assets be moved into a trust if someone is incapacitated? Is that something normal?
Anything can be accomplished under the law, right? So what
Right.
lawyers do is they design solutions for people's problems. That's what we
Uh-huh.
do. So yes, there's a way to do that. But let's talk about the common scenarios. So if you come and you go see an estate planning attorney, right? Generally, when I'm doing estate planning for people, whether or not they have a trust, I'm also setting up these other documents for them. As a matter of course, we do it all at the same time. That's your living will, also called your advanced medical directive, your healthcare agent power of attorney, so that you get to pick now the person who and under what circumstances is going to make medical decisions for you if it becomes necessary. And then there's durable powers of attorney, and they can be springing, or we can put them into action now. Now, when I tell people during the conferences is, let's say later, 20 years from now, you break your leg or you're getting infirm, you're in an assisted living facility, you just can't get to the bank or you can't go meet with your broker. Who's the person that you're going to empower to take care of those things for you if you still want to do them? Your question was, can we move it into the trust if we're incapacitated? And the answer is that you would have to already appoint somebody else control over your assets, because once you are incapacitated, game over, unless somebody has set up a guardianship or a conservatorship for you, and it's much more difficult. So ideally, if in the cases of incapacity or diminished capacity, what we want to do is we already want to have thought, who's going to be in charge of my stuff, and then under what circumstances does that power spring? We call that a springing power of attorney. So you can say, if I'm incapacitated under these circumstances, and this two doctors give me a letter, or one doctor, or sometimes the attorney, in fact, the power of attorney can just do an affidavit, right? A sworn affidavit saying, my mom can't care for her own affairs anymore, so I'm exercising my authority under this power of attorney. That would be much less common. And then they would be able to move your assets into trust. But there's a savings if you didn't do that. We have what's called a pour over will. And that says, Cheree, I set up a trust for you today. We do the hard work of funding the trust and moving assets into trust, or at least allowing them to be done at the appropriate time. And then between now and the date of your death, you acquired a bunch more assets that you never did come back to me, and we move into the trust. Well, your pour over will takes what your estate is at the date of your passing, and it just boop, automatically moves everything into the trust so it can be administered out of there.
I like that because, when we set up our trust initially, we had to put everything in there. And yeah, it's probably been years since we've
Yeah.
updated it. So,
Make sure you have a pour over will.
yes. Um, so I do want to give people a chance to ask questions as well. I see Jules is here, and Tim and Somalia. Do any of you have questions with regards to trust and protecting your real estate, or just protecting yourself, period? Asset protection.
Yeah, I've got questions, not really planned ahead of time. Thank you for your time. Uh, Miss, is it Ayat or Ayat? I don't know. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
How
it's
do you?
AOT. Good
Ayat.
job.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Pennsylvania. My family was in construction, real estate, land development, whatever. So I actually have like I don't know if it's a revocable trust, I think, that was written by a now deceased lawyer in Pennsylvania. And I know you practice in Virginia, but um, and I don't know what your fee schedule is or if you have, initial free consultations, right? But if that was something like I brought to you, could you go over it, or because it's Pennsylvania, it's something you couldn't go over with me?
So, we're being recorded here and we're in public. I want to say that you can only practice law in the states where you are barred to practice law, or else that's called the unlicensed practice of law. And we're all barred, prevented from doing that. However, because of my network, from being in the military, there are many military spouses and ex-spouses like me who are barred in multiple states, and we're not very employable when we're moving all over the place. So I have relationships with lawyers in every single state so that I can service individuals in every single state. I'd be the main person, and then we bring them on as a consultant in order to make sure that we're doing it within the bounds of the law. To answer your question, yeah, it's a great idea to have somebody go over your trust and make sure that it's accomplishing your goals. Because when people first set up their estate plans, sometimes they become more sophisticated, their net worth increases, their asset portfolio increases, and as their family grows or changes, then the goals are different. And it's really, really important, I would say, every 5 years to revisit it and make sure you have all the protections and that it's going to accomplish your goals. So very highly recommended.
Okay. So then again, you're in Alexandria, right? So I'm in Alexandria now, and I'm I don't currently have any real estate beyond my residence here, but I mean, I'm always looking for opportunities, whether they're here or in Pennsylvania, like where I have properties. Um, Again, do you have like an initial consultation? Do you have a fee structure? Like, what would it be
We
to just
just set
come
up
in
an
and?
initial consult, and then I'm going to put my email in here for you.
Okay, thank you.
And then hold on. But just so everybody knows, it's Phoenix at futurecounsellaw.com. Phoenix at futurecounsellaw is my email. Yeah, and happy to consult. And then we sort of make a roadmap, and then we quote a price and sort of move forward. Like I mentioned before, there's no one size fits all. So even my business, like I have a subscription model for fractional general counsel, and that's if you're setting up an LLC or a C corp or an S corp or a real estate investment trust, then there's a little bit of subscription because we can plan. Hey, we have to have annual meetings or monthly meetings. We want to make sure that your bylaws and shareholder agreements and joint venture agreements are done correctly. But sometimes it's a lot of one-off stuff. And the initial consultations about how to set up those companies are very different depending on whoever, what the circumstances are.
Okay, thank you. I'll reach out to you
Yeah, it's
offline.
my pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Jules, Somalia, do you all
Yeah,
have questions?
I do. So I'm also very new to this real estate. So I only have like a condo. But as I hopefully grow, acquiring properties, when do you think it best to open a trust or start a trust? Like in the beginning here, or and then continue to add to it throughout the years, or kind of wait until you have a few properties and then just put everything into one trust?
Such a good question. The answer is it depends. Tell me a little bit about what your best case scenario dream is with your investments. Are you looking to hold title? Are you looking to finance and get out and make money on financing? Are you looking to have income producing properties? What's your approach?
I'm currently a nurse, so I would like to have real estate kind of as a slow exit out of nursing and be able to live off real estate. And then when I retire, just have enough for myself. I don't plan on getting married or having kids or anything.
Okay. So in that case, for someone in a similar, and I'm not giving specific legal advice, there's no attorney-client relationship being developed right now, but in a case like yours, okay, then you should consider and consult with an attorney about how to fence off those assets, which is something that I mentioned before. Why? Because let's say that you're holding an income producing property and you have tenants, either the Airbnb route or long-term tenants while the asset appreciates. There's a lot of liability and inherent risk coming along with being a landlord. If you're looking at multifamily homes or office buildings or anything like that, the liability only goes up, right? The potential liability only goes up. So let's say that you're insured and then there's some type of lawsuit or some type of judgment, or one of your business partners goes bankrupt. That asset needs to be fenced off from all of your other assets so that no one can go after your personal assets because something went wrong with that one particular transaction. Somebody slipped and fell. I don't know. A car crashed into it. It caught fire. There was a sinkhole. There's a lot of different things that can happen. So you want to fence off that asset. So depending on how big your empire gets, if you want to rely on real estate for your income and for your retirement, you may want to do what I've done for other people, which is you have a parent company, you have a holding company, and then you may want to set up some subs, depending on it. You don't have to do that. If you're involved in a flip, or you're involved in development, land development, then you can have one holding company and then you open a sub like for a revolving development deal. And, they just go in there while they're being developed and then you don't have to worry about it. There's some transfers that are associated with that, deeding property into and out of that. And so you would need an attorney to assist you with that to make sure it was done compliantly, because you don't want to have any problems with title. But I guess the best answer to your question of whether you wait now or acquire all the assets and then put them into trust is I would do it now. I would not wait until later, because you don't want to see your asset, like the potential growth that you have, hindered in any way.
Okay. So follow-up question. So if I were going the landlord route, whether Airbnb or long-term, having each one of those properties in its own LLC is what I've heard is the best approach. But would all of those different LLCs go into the trust?
Um, yes, they could, and they most likely should. And whether you need to have separate LLCs or some type of separate vehicle or entity for every single property really depends on what those properties are, what the purpose of holding them is, and how they're performing. But if you're just talking about the regular rental property, fencing them off can be good. That's the pro. The con is that it's additional fees every year, it's additional compliance reporting, and it's additional bookkeeping. So I like to take a kind of practical approach. Like a lawyer will tell you the best way to make an architect, how to do the architecture of any deal or anything for like maximum protection. But you do have to weigh that against the day-to-day practicalities of managing real estate and managing an asset portfolio. Maybe it's not worth it to pay a lawyer to manage, 3 or 4 different LLCs and pay the annual fees and the annual reporting and stuff for all of that. Maybe you just do want to put it all into one trust, instead of having a bunch of sub LLCs. So it's worth considering, and you can move with alacrity between these different solutions as well. You can, just because you're committed to one now, when you have 2 to 3 properties, and then you have like 7 or 8 properties later, you can change that and convert the portfolio.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you.
Thanks, Jules. Somalia, you have any questions?
I think my questions were kind of very similar to like what Juliana just asked. So I'm still in the process of building up my portfolio. Right now, I have a few multifamilies and single family units. And I've started the process in terms of creating like different LLCs for different things. So like, the parent company, and then like the parent company owns like the other ones that are like working vehicles right now. But I definitely want to get into the how do I protect myself piece of things, because I feel like that's like the missing piece to my puzzle right now.
Yeah, I feel like you have good protection against, potential liability that could result in, diminishment of those assets. One thing I do want to mention, before we wrap up here is, gosh, the thought just flew out of my head, y'all. It's like after 6 p.m. Smalley, you were talking about, multifamily. So, if you have LLCs C Corps, S Corps, other types of entities, even partnerships. One of the really, really important things that you will talk to, or that a good business attorney should talk to you about in terms of your like strategic growth planning, is business succession planning. So at some point, you may want to transfer some control or ownership of your company or your entity to someone else. And if that looks like an asset purchase, then not having a business succession plan formally memorialized is going to inhibit the sale of that asset. And the entire portfolio of the asset. So what does this mean? Why am I using such big words? I'm sorry. Let's say, like a client of mine, you started a company and it's a holding company, and the assets in that were held by the company, like its net worth, started out low, and it's going to be a lot next year. And so they decided, I want out of this business. I want to go do something else. I want to go teach scuba diving, right? So I'm going to sell off this entire portfolio. If we're looking at an asset purchase and you're trying to sell it to another one of somebody else in Cheree's network who wants to acquire it, but they're looking at the deal, they're going to get good advice from their lawyer saying, hey, while this deal is pending or while we're in transition, right? What happens if Somalia passes away? Then where is that asset going to go? Who's in control of it? Like, why would I want to even begin talking to this person about entering, any type of deal with them if she gets run over by a car tomorrow and, I've tied up my liquid capital anticipating this deal, or I've gone and I've got funding or financing. So you need to have a clear business succession plan for that reason. Business succession planning is also really important if you don't expect that your beneficiaries or the people you're leaving behind are going to liquidate the portfolio after you pass on. If you think they may want to continue managing the assets for income producing potential, or for benefit of the beneficiaries of a trust as a trustee, you need to have a succession plan saying which one of them is in charge. Are they now going to co-own it? How will the shares be distributed amongst them at the time? And you can do that within the instructions in a trust. But if you aren't moving the assets into trust right now, you can do it as a standalone business succession plan for your business. And I highly recommend that. Once you reach a certain level of operational, level, if you're small potatoes, you don't need to do it right away, but you should be thinking about it.
Okay, good advice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah, that business succession planning is so important. So many people are not doing it or doing it effectively or doing it ineffectively. So Tim did ask a couple of additional questions. All of the additional costs you just mentioned, this was a while ago when you were talking to Juliana, all the additional costs you just mentioned were in regards to having each asset in an individual LLC?
Correct. So for every entity that you form, you're going to have annual reporting requirements. You're going to pay your bookkeeper for a separate set of books. You're going to pay your accountant. You're going to pay, your annual fee. You're going to pay your attorney. Some of these can really be minimized if you're very informal about it. Some of them should never be avoided. But I think the administrative burden of keeping the books straight, making sure the accounting is correct. Yeah. So Tim, I see you weighing in. Exactly. So the more entities that you set up, the more administrative work that you have to do and the more administrative costs. Sometimes the juice is worth the squeeze. Sometimes it's not worth the squeeze. So this is an individual decision.
Yeah, I've known people who've had a lot of entities, and sometimes it does get difficult to manage them all. So Tim is also saying here, or asking, and if so, are you saying that having the various properties in a trust will preclude the need for LLCs for protection? Basically, does the trust offer protection similar to the separate legal entity structures?
It can, but the long answer is it depends on the kind of trust. So you've got revocable living trust, which Tim, I think you mentioned, you have experience and knowledge with. You've got irrevocable trusts. You have complex trusts. You've got, in the case of when you have a corporation or another type of entity, you can have the elected small business trust or the qualified subchapter S corporation trust. And all of these are different. And so I don't like to start the conversation by educating on like each one, although I can, it should be up on my website soon. But I think the conversation always starts with what the client or individual's goals are. Where are you now? Where do you think you want to go? Where else do you think you might want to go? And then we talk about all of those options. So
go ahead, Tim.
I was gonna say thank you. Yeah, like it's probably best that I just reach out to you and we set up a call or an appointment or something because my situation's like weird and fluid. Like I said, I've got some stuff in Pennsylvania. I've got two different parents. They're split up, but they're both, getting advanced in age. So I stand to also inherit some stuff. So then after
Yep.
that's going to happen, I'm going to have other new planning to do.
Right.
I've got children, wife situation currently that, I need to kind of plan around. So, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect situation that will probably, need that 5-year check-in every year. I think that that's really good that you're thinking about this. I'm so glad you're on the call. Thank you for introducing us, Cheree.
Absolutely.
And
So
a question, Phoenix,
ahead.
where are you based out of?
Arlington, Virginia.
Okay.
Primarily, I serve clients in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia region. I also have some clients in Chicago and Florida now.
Okay. And you would be able to like assist, like I'm a Virginia resident, but half of my portfolio is in the state of Pennsylvania as well.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yep.
okay.
Great. Well, definitely reach out to Phoenix. Her email address is in the chat here for all of you, and I can also email it to you if needed. Um, Anything else that we didn't ask you, Phoenix, that you think we should, think about or be aware of?
I know you have this webinar frequently. I don't know every topic that you've covered. And I'm just going to give like a quick broad brush overview and happy to come back and talk about any of these things or just provide more resources. But if you don't know about 1031 exchanges so that you can defer your capital gains, and that's when you are offloading an asset from your portfolio and using those proceeds to buy a similar investment according to the definitions under 1031, then you can have a lot of savings and defer your capital gains. Trusts qualify if they're managed correctly and set up correctly for capital gains discounts, depending on how the accounting is done. So that's something Tim, goes to your question, like, can they give the same protection? Yes, they can. The accounting is different. It just depends who's in turn. And what's the benefit of avoiding these capital gains? Well, if you have an asset that's called a short-term asset, which means you sell it and offload it in under a year or within a year, you're going to be taxed on the capital gains according to what your income tax bracket is. But if you're holding assets for longer than a year, and then you are divesting yourself of those assets, you're going to be taxed according to your status at either a 0%, 15%, or 20% rate on that. Do any of us want that? No. The dream is grow it as big as you can and then have it go work for you, work for your family, work for, your mission, work for, the foundation, whatever you want to do. So I want to help people achieve those things.
Right. Tim is also saying, besides trusts, I think you said you also cover estate planning, wills, and other planning. Is that correct?
That is correct. Everything that helps you plan for your future. So I name my firm Future Counsel. So we're doing future planning. Yep.
I love that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. Again, Phoenix, how can people get in touch with you? If they want to schedule time with you, learn a little bit
Yeah,
more.
thank you so much. So it's Phoenix, Phoenix, at futurecounsel.law.com. Website is www.futurecounsel.law.com. futurecounsel.law.com. I'm on LinkedIn. Just you feel free. I love LinkedIn. I'm very active on it. So you can link up with me through Cheree as a mutual contact if you'd like to. Just call me anytime.
Yes, and I kept going back and forth on my computer because I was making sure people didn't have questions on Facebook or any other place out there. So, but I want to thank everyone again for being here this evening. And definitely, it doesn't make sense for us to build these portfolios, build wealth, just to lose them to the IRS, which Tim said is a four-letter word and not three-letter. Um, to lose it to taxes, to lose it to, incorrect paperwork, to lose it to squabbling children and siblings and all of that stuff. So I definitely suggest that you make sure that your paperwork is together, because I've seen a lot of issues where paperwork wasn't together, and it wasn't a good day when, when the distributions needed to happen. So thank you, Phoenix. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I will see you all on the next webinar we have. Take care,
You were
everybody.
so fun. Really fun group. Thanks, guys, and
Thanks.
happy early Thanksgiving. Bye.
Thank
Happy
you. Have a good
Thanksgiving.
evening.
Thanks, Cheree.
Good night.